In today's training, we're going to talk about the FAR, right? And we're going to talk about it in what I consider a fun way. The FAR is an important part of government contracting. FAR stands for Federal Acquisition Regulation, right? And so the FAR is an important part of government contracting, government acquisition, and how the government buys, but we need to put it in perspective. What I like to say is you don't really need to pay attention to the FAR at all if you're not making money. If you're not making money, you need to pay attention to sales. Hence the reason I teach sales every single day, year after year now, so that I can teach you how to do sales. Once you start making money, then you can start figuring out what aspects of a federal acquisition regulation applies to you. It's like the tax law. The tax law really doesn't apply to you if you're not making money. That's why my 10-year-olds don't pay attention to it. But as they start making money, they'll have to figure it out, right? And so today, what I want to talk about is just understanding three key parts of the FAR that I really like, right? You don't need to know all of the FAR. Even contracting officers don't understand all of the FAR or have all of it memorized. I often, over the last 20 years, have experienced contracting officers who are like, oh, I didn't realize that. And that's totally normal because the FAR is like this big. It's huge. It's like, how can anybody memorize that? What we know is that the reference manual is there. And so, you know, the FAR is a fundamental part of government contracting, fundamental part of how the government buys. But the part I really want to get you focused on today is thinking about how the FAR can be taken advantage of, and how do we sit there and make it work for us, not just us working for it. And so in today, when I talk about how to use the FAR to your advantage, I want to break that up into three sections. The first thing is I just want to level set what the FAR is. Not everybody is completely familiar with it, right? And that's totally normal. Even me, when I was running my companies, I don't even pretend to be an expert. I hired an expert who's the FAR expert, right? But I want to talk about what the FAR is and why you should ignore it. And I know that's kind of a controversial statement, so we'll get into it. And then I'm going to go into the next section of today's training, which is talking about my three favorite FAR clauses. And I generally don't like to talk about FAR clauses, because I feel like it's, I can drop this FAR clause and that FAR clause. I've been doing this a long time, and I can't even drop the FAR clauses of my three favorite. I just know them by name, and I remember them, and I go in. So you don't have to be an expert to remember it, but I do want to point these three out so that you pay attention, because they'll help you. And then I'm going to talk, the last thing I want to talk about in today's training is when I tell you about these three FAR clauses that are my favorite and that I think can be used to your advantage. When I tell you about these three FAR clauses, I want to talk to you about, give you some tips on how do you get them into the RFP. I don't want you to just stand around and hope it's going to be in the RFP. How do you push it into the RFP? That is sales, right? That's capture. And so we'll get into that. So today we're going to be talking about my three favorite FAR clauses that you can use to your advantage. If that's what you're here for, put FAR fun in the chat. Let me know you're here to have some excitement and some fun around the FAR. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonald. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to my federal sales training, where I provide tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years in the federal market as a small business owner, and since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. When we follow the process A to Z, we're going to have repeatable, predictable results, and that's what I want for you. That's what I want for your company. One of the things you can do right now that just increases your likelihood of success is to build your network by putting your company name, your core competency, like 2 or 3 words, into the chat. Let us know that you're there. Maybe even throw in your city. I saw somebody earlier, I don't know if it was James or somebody in chat. Sorry, I don't remember who it was, but down in San Antonio, Texas, I think. That's a good thing to put in the chat, because maybe other people say, hey, we're in Texas too, or we're in San Antonio as well. Why don't we connect offline, have a coffee or something, have an in-person meeting that's building off of this. So make sure you engage in the chat. Let us know who you are. You don't have to, but it's a great way to network. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to my newsletter. It's the Government Contracting Success Newsletter. It's the largest one for government contracting within LinkedIn. And we share constantly strategy, points of contact information, and other really valuable information related to government contracting. Okay, let's get started. I've got about 22 minutes left, and let's get started talking about what the FAR is and why you should ignore it. Apparently, I don't know how to spell that ignore, but that's all right. You just ignore the word ignore. Okay, so the idea is I don't want to tell you everything about the FAR, but I just want to kind of level set. And really, this is things I was confused about when I was a business owner or when I was doing government contracting full bore, right? Is you have the CFR and you have the FAR. These are two regulations that are out there. The CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations. And the idea about it is that it just covers all areas of federal law, more than just acquisition. And pay attention to that one, because a lot of times that's where rules come in, or whatever we want to call it, regulations, laws, policy. That's where things come in. The FAR is just part of the CFR. And the reason I say this is you don't need to have a whole lot of engagement in these two words, really. You need to follow the rules when the rules apply to you, but otherwise somebody else's full-time job is to be an expert at the FAR or the CFR. But you'll always see people, you often might see people putting out comments saying, or putting out notices saying they're looking for comments on new rules. Generally, that's happening at that CFR level. Not to sit there and tell you everything about it, but more importantly, the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, this is the part that guides the whole acquisition and procurement lifecycle within the federal government. This is the part we just want to be aware of. And like I said, you learn the FAR incrementally as it matters to you. So if you're not making money, don't even worry about spelling FAR, right? But as you make money, there's certain aspects you want to pay attention to, and you'll learn that. But the FAR, and I put here Title 48 of the CFR. If you're bored, you can go look at the CFR, and you can look at Title 488, and you'll see it. And I don't claim to be any level of expert on the entire FAR, just on the parts that matter to me. So the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, is really about the acquisition of goods and services. It lays out the policies and procedures for how the government buys, right, and how we interact with each other, et cetera. And so it's a great reference material. It is not a good book to buy or pick up or have on your bookshelf. It's a great reference material. And if you're a business owner, small business owner, understand this. As you pass $1 million, you're going to start having money to hire people in your back office. And one of the people you're going to hire probably is like a contract manager, contracts manager, administrator, a FAR expert, somebody who really understands that part of the business better, because business owners should not be experts on the FAR. We should be experts on sales, right? We should be experts on maybe delivery, but certainly on sale. The FAR and contract management, you can hire somebody to do that. You just need to have a high level understanding of the FAR, and you have to understand that you need to be compliant. So the last thing I put here is just on the FAR, right? Ignore the FAR until you need it. So if you're not making money, you don't need it at all. As you start getting subcontracts, you have to pay attention to it a little bit. So if you subcontract and you're just getting a couple of positions on a particular contract, you might not even have to pay attention to FAR at that point. But as it starts, and I know there are people who say, yes, you do, but you really don't. And as you move forward, right, and you start working on bigger contracts, sometimes that FAR language that's in a contract award or in the RFP that a prime contractor is paying attention to, sometimes that'll start flowing down. And I don't mean that in an official way. I just mean sometimes you're really going to have to start paying attention to it. That's when you start paying attention to the FAR. The other time you can pay attention to the FAR is when you want to take advantage of it. And that's the part I want to talk about today, right? Again, I'm not trying to talk about everything that's in the FAR. I just want to talk about my 3 favorite FAR clauses. And so the 3 clauses that I love, and I'll come back and explain each one of them. And I really want to tell you a story on each one. But it's a HUBZone price preference, the release of the 8A requirement, and incentive contracts. Those are the 3 FAR clauses that are my all-time favorite, and the ones that I think that are really an advantage to small businesses. The rest of them are just kind of there. And by the way, if there's another one that's really cool, tell me later. I'd love to hear that 4th one that I might be missing. And I don't mean compliance. I mean fully advantaged. So let's talk about the HUBZone price preference, and I'll tell you why these are my favorite clauses, right? So first off, just for the fun of it, I put the FAR clause in here. If you want to go look at it, you should, by all means, go take a look at it. But here it's FAR 19.1307, however that's said. So that's the actual FAR clause that you can go take a look at, or the section. The HUBZone price preference, the reason it is so cool is that it gives HUBZone small businesses, when they're competing in a full and open competition, so going after a contract, let's say it's $50 million, they're going after a contract, and Booz Allen and Leidos are their competition, or whoever, right? When you're going after an opportunity and you have the HUBZone price preference in here, and remember, what I'm telling you is an introduction to the topic. If you like it, if you're going to pursue it, go learn more. But the price advantage says if Booz Allen comes in with $1 million price for what they're offering, and you come in with $1 million offer, your price preference pushes. It's really weird. It should be just a reduction of your price to a degree. But what they do is they sit there and say, well, let's put Booz Allen's price 10% higher, so 1,100,000. And that's the idea. That HUBZone price preference, if you're a HUBZone company and you're in this full and open opportunity and you're pushing it, then you're able to push that up, right? This gets significant. I just pushed it up by 100,000. Now the government's looking at that HUBZone going, wow, it's kind of attractive. But imagine this. I worked with a customer, it was like 4 or 5 years ago when I was really working with the HUBZone businesses, pushing them. And this contract was over $100 million that they were going after full and open. And they got the HUBZone price preference clause put into the RFP. So when they were going after it and the competition came back, when you talk about a contract that is coming in at a price point around $100 million and you have a 10% price preference, then there's a lot of room. So it's not just about two companies coming in at $100 million, right? And then that large company all the large companies have to push theirs up by 10%. The idea, or anybody really, the idea is that's pretty significant. But what if your HUBZone company response was a little higher than the other company, right? Now you're pushing it equal or maybe even higher. And so that's a big deal, that price advantage. And I'm going to talk maybe a little bit about this in a second. But what you want to do if you're not a HUBZone company is find HUBZone companies. This is why I say when you build strategic relationships out there, you should have strategic relationships with large as when you're ready, but small businesses, and small businesses that are SDVOSB, woman-owned small business, HUBZone small business, and 8A. You want to be able to play in each of those swim lanes. And so finding a HUBZone business or two that is similar to yours, your ability to go after work together with them, that's a good thing. When you do this, you have this chance to be able to add in that HUBZone price preference and really go after full and open contracts. This is a big deal too. If you think about companies that are graduating, getting ready to graduate from small to large, preference, getting yourself ready to compete on the full and open. Well, while you're still smaller, while you're still a HUBZone, take advantage of that clause. So that first one that's my favorite is the HUBZone price preference. That one actually was my favorite, working with a lot of different businesses who kept trying to push that in. And by the way, sometimes the government doesn't put it in, sometimes they do. I'm not here to say they have to do it every time. I want to inform you so you're aware that it exists so that you can have that conversation with your buyer. Okay, the second FAR clause that's my favorite one is this one it's called release of 8A requirement, and it's FAR 19.806. The idea of this is that say a contract, a current contract is under the 8A program. So that means it was set aside or direct awarded to an 8A small business, but it is under the 8A program. And the idea, if you've never heard this, there's this line out there that says once an 8A, always an 8A, right? And that sounds good from the 8A small business program standpoint. And that sounds really bad for those of us who might not be 8As. But what if you're the 8A who won that contract? You're the incumbent, right? But you've graduated in the while that contract is going on, and now it's up for recompete. And when that contract is being recompeted, because it's in the 8A program, it's going to be recompeted as an 8A set aside or 8A competitive or even a 8A direct award. I learned about this one when I had a customer talking to me about this. And I said, well, let's go see what we can do. And what I realized was that contract was so big that it was going to impact like 60+% of their revenue. They would have instantly dropped. And I didn't even know the FAR stuff at the moment, right? Again, I don't pretend to be this FAR expert where I know everything in the FAR. But what I do know is sales. And I said, that's crazy. There's no way the government is going to have the 8A small business program, which is designed for business development, not sales, but business development to grow a strong American small business that can continue after the 8A program, right? There's no way they're going to do that, to only have it go up and drop down because the government decided not to let the incumbent compete on the very work they've just been doing. I said, that's crazy. That's silly. And so I went to hunting, right? And I went into the FAR and I found this clause. And when I started reading it, totally made sense. It says if it will be detrimental to the incumbent who has that contract for them not to be able to compete on it, then the SBA and the contracting officer can decide to pull it out of the 8A program. And this company that I'm talking about was an 8A and a woman-owned small business. And so what I did is just took that language and I wrote a quick little template letter for my customer. And I said, go back to the contracting officer. Let's try it out. Go back and say, hey, this is going to be hugely impactful to us. Would you be open to taking it out of the 8A program and opening it up to women-owned small business set aside, for example? I don't need you to give it to me. That can't happen. But could I compete in it? And here's the FAR clause. And the contracting officer went, I didn't even know about that. I didn't think about that. Let me reach out to the SBA. And so they reached out to the SBA business opportunity specialist who was responsible for that. And long story short, they pulled it out, right? And it makes total sense. If you're an 8A small business that is growing and you've got this, especially if you've got an anchor type project or contract, and it's going to come up for recompete, but because it's 8A and you've graduated, you can't compete, then you're going to be in a jam. But if you know about this, then you're going to be able to take advantage of it. And the contracting officer and the SBA, they want small businesses to succeed. It's not unfair to pull it out of the SBA program, especially they're not pulling it out and giving it to the incumbent. They're saying, I'm going to pull it out of the 8A so the incumbent can compete. Now it's up to the incumbent to win. There's no unfair advantage. We're just not going to keep it in the 8A program. So that's my second favorite FAR clause, this idea of releasing the 8A requirement. And that was awesome because my customer went along and won it, right? As a woman-owned small business, and it came out perfect. So remember that FAR clause, release of the 8A requirement. By the way, don't keep these to yourself. When you have teammates and you have partners out there that are HUBZone or 8A, et cetera, say, hey, you know what Neil just told me the other day was this. Let people know. This is one of my reasons I say government contracting is not a secret. It's a process. It's only a secret because we're not telling each other, right? But literally, it is just a FAR process. Okay, so number 3, my third favorite FAR clause, and I think my all-time favorite because it really fits well with my merit-based personality, right? I don't like seniority. I'm older, but that doesn't make me any better than a 20-year-old. My experience makes me better, right? But it's my actual experience, my merit. But when we walk up to the table, what have you done for me lately, right? And so I like this clause, this incentive contract clause, because it's merit-based. And it's, you can see here, it's FAR Subpart 16.4. You can go take a look at it. And in this clause, what it says basically is the government, the buyer, has the ability to incentivize me to achieve certain results and then pay me a bonuses. And I'm not using FAR language. I'm just using my sales language, right? If I have $1 million contract, I can get a $100,000 bonus on top of it if I achieve a specific acquisition objective. And I'll talk about that in a second. And so when I get that clause into the RFP and or the contract, right, especially the contract, you're negotiating performance goals that are going to be to the advantage of the government. The government is looking to achieve something, and they're willing to pay an incentive to achieve that. And so here's how I learned about this FAR clause, right? It's so beautiful. I wish I'd known about it even earlier. But I had a contract once that the government wanted, a government agency, a federal buyer wanted to give me. And it was a decent sized contract, $4 million contract. And in there, what they said was, we want to put a penalty clause if you don't get done on time. What they were trying to do, in my last company, was Microsoft SharePoint. They needed to migrate from here to here. And if they stayed on where they were at, on-prem, they would have to automatically renew for a whole nother year's worth of licenses that they didn't want. So they needed to migrate by the end of September. So let's say they gave me 6 months or something. They needed to migrate by a certain period of time in order to do that. And if it went over September, they'd be penalized. And so they were like, well, we want to penalize you if you don't get it on time. And literally, because this is just how I am, the minute they said it, it didn't bother me. What I said was, if I get it done early, can I get a bonus? And they're like, well, shoot, we don't care. It's like, and so we started talking. And this is where I learned about the incentive contract, is that they could put a penalty on us. And we have to decide to accept it or not, right? We don't have to accept it. But they can say, if you don't get the work done on time, we're going to penalize you $1 a day or $1 million a day, right? Whatever the impact and the value to them is, or the cost to them. And so they have that, but there's also this opposite incentive. What I talked to them about and really encouraged them from an incentive standpoint was, look, you don't want me to get it done on time. That's when you're starting to penalty, right? You want me to get it done early enough that you stop worrying about it every single day. You stop wondering, are we going to get close? Because the reality is, not only are we going to get there, but this is a risk you don't want to accept. And you're going to penalize me, but that penalty is not enough. So why don't we back it up? And so what I said to them was, every 2 weeks out, that I get it done, I want an incremental increase in a bonus. And it was like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% kind of thing. It was reasonable for them and for me. But one of the things I knew was that we were really good at this and we could just, really accelerate our timeline. It was one of those projects where literally we could just throw a little bit more hours and people at it and we would get it done on time. But we were so good at it, by the way. But this clause, the incentive contract, is one that I really love and I want you to pay attention to, right? FAR Subpart 16.4, it's an incentive one. And when you're talking to the government, especially if you're in work that can do this, like let's say you're, installing floors. What if we get it done really fast? Nobody trips or something. I want an incentive. And if somebody trips, we have a penalty, right? So understand how to have those conversations. By the way, keep this in mind with all of these. Any conversation is totally okay. So let's go ahead and come back to talk about how do you get these into the RFP and the contract that you're going to get awarded. So these are just a couple of tips I'm giving you, right? This is what I do with my customers on a regular basis. But the idea for you is begin with the WIFM. WIFM stands for what's in it for me, but switch that me to a them. So put a T at the end of WIFM, however you say that. WIF it. No, that doesn't sound good. But anyways, think about your customer, right? When you're trying to think about the HUBZone price preference or coming out of the 8A program or the incentive contracts, right? When you come out of an 8A program, it's not just to the incumbent's advantage, it's to the government's advantage to have the incumbent competing, because if they keep the incumbent, they keep that institutional knowledge that the incumbent has. So think about what's in it for them. What would they value? Sometimes we call this value proposition, right? Like what's the value proposition to them to have a HUBZone price preference in there? Maybe they're giving HUBZone companies a chance at it. So the first step is start with what's in it for them. The second step, and this is really important, is to shift left, right? I talk about the sales life cycle often in my training. And the idea is you have idea stage and then market research and then acquisition, which is basically when the RFP drops. And then you have execution, right? And so you want to keep shifting, and even past the RFP, you want to go into market research. If you're lucky, you could go even past that. So in market research, you could be talking to the government about HUBZone price preference or the 8A program one, right? But that incentive one, that's not just the contracting officer who cares. They probably don't even care that much. The ones who care is the program office, the ones who have to do the work, right? And so shifting left in the acquisition life cycle in the conversation will allow you to start talking and teaching your customers. Did you know there's a HUBZone price preference? Did you know that this doesn't have to be in the 8A program? We can pull it out so that my company can compete again. Did you know that we can do incentives, penalties, and incentives that might really work to what you're trying to get done? So make sure you understand that. You can always do this in the sources sought. And then the last tip I have for how to get it into the RFP is just ask, right? I kind of talked about this already in the shift left, but just ask the contracting officer. And by the way, if you don't know, KO and CO stands for contract officer. KO is what we say in the military. CO is what we say in the civilian side. And I wish they would stabilize that or standardize that. But CO in the military stands for commanding officer. So we say KO, contract officer. That's the only reason when you see us say KO or CO. But talk to them or the program office people and just ask them to have it put in. This literally is capture. Capture is about shaping an opportunity. These three acquisition or FAR clauses that I mentioned are just examples of what gets done in capture, where you go in and try to have a conversation, demonstrating to the contracting officer and to the government buyer holistically that what you're suggesting is good for them and good for you. There's nothing wrong with it being good for you, but it's also good for them. Okay, so here's what I want you to remember from today's training, right? The first thing is just remember that the FAR is more than just compliance. You should look in there and think of it also as a tool to help you win. So it's a sales tool. Don't try to memorize the FAR, but understand that it's more than just a compliance exercise. The second thing is, like I mentioned earlier, teach your teammates. If you have companies out there, teach them. If you're teaming up with a large prime, it's to their advantage to know if they're going after an opportunity and a HUBZone price preference could come in. They might put you as the prime contractor because then they know that it's coming down. So educate your teammates about these clauses along with the government buyer. And then the last one is go make friends in the HUBZone. I talked about the HUBZone price preference. That one in particular, make sure you're building relationships with 4 or 5 HUBZone firms that are in your space. We call this competimates. Some days we're competing against them. And some days we're teaming, even if we're kind of in the same space. That's totally cool, because if you go after bigger contracts, you get a piece, I get a piece. So if you have relationships with HUBZone companies, you might see an opportunity that's full and open to go after. You come along and you ask them to prime it, and you team up with them, and you guys can try to go after it together. So hopefully that made sense. If you're looking to accelerate your growth within the federal market, I have a BD Accelerator workshop that we do that helps our customers a lot. It's an advanced program that we offer. So it's for companies that are generally doing $1 million plus to make sure they can afford it. If you're interested in learning more, just go to govconchamber.com. You'll see it right there on the homepage. For all of us, as we remember the FAR and we go through our day, just remember, government contracting, it's not a secret. It's just a process. I'll see you in the next training.